You can optimize everything about your life and still be someone that people who know you best cannot reach. This is one of the harder truths in the men's content space, because the men's content space has been built on the assumption that discipline is the answer. And it is, but only to a certain class of problem. The gym handles the body. The financial system handles the money. The morning routine handles the output. But there is a room in a man's life that none of these things can reach. And the men who have built everything else without attending to that room are some of the most quietly troubled men I have encountered. They have the body they wanted. They have the business or the income or the trajectory. They have the family, the routine, the discipline, and they are running. Not toward anything in particular, just running. From the quiet, from the stillness, from whatever would be audible if they stopped. I want to talk today about interior discipline, the one practice the men's content space has almost entirely ignored. The discipline not of doing, but of being. Not of building, but of being still enough to be built. I spent several years building what I believed was a disciplined life. The wake-up time, the workout, the planning system, the financial tracking, the reading list. I was genuinely committed to all of it. Not in a performative way, not for social media, but because I believed that if I could get the external architecture right, everything else would follow. That belief made a certain kind of sense. It was traceable, measurable. I could see the results in the mirror and the spreadsheet and the habit tracker, and I took those results as confirmation that I was doing the right things. What I could not see, and what took me longer to name than I am proud of, was what was not happening inside any of it. I was building in every direction except inward. My morning routine was 90 minutes long and included exactly 0 minutes of sitting before God with no agenda. I had a journaling practice, but it was primarily a performance review. What did I do? What should I do next? Where am I behind? I was treating my interior life the way I treated my finances, as a system to be optimized rather than a relationship to be tended. The moment I remember most specifically was a Saturday morning in late 2023. I had done everything on my list. The workout was done. The planning was done. The reading was done. The house was quiet. My family still sleeping. I had maybe 20 minutes of unstructured time before the day began. And I remember sitting in my living room chair and feeling, for the first time in a long time, genuinely uncomfortable in the silence. Not the discomfort of a man who has been lazy and knows it. The discomfort of a man who has been running and doesn't know what from. The silence had nothing in it to distract me. And what surfaced in the absence of distraction was something I had been carefully managing around without consciously deciding to. The question of who I was when I wasn't producing anything didn't have a clean answer. And that absence of an answer told me something important about what I had and hadn't been building. That Saturday morning was the beginning of a different kind of discipline. One that did not appear on any productivity tracker. One that produced no visible output for a long time. And one that I now believe is more foundational to who I am than anything else I have built. The men's content space has done something very interesting in the last decade. It has secularized the concept of discipline. It took a set of practices that, in their original context, in the monastic tradition, in the biblical tradition, in the practice of the Desert Fathers and the Church Fathers, were always understood as tools of interior formation and reconstructed them as output optimization protocols. The purpose of discipline, in its original form, was never to optimize your output. It was to shape your character, to align your interior life with something true and permanent, to practice, in the body and in the daily structure, the orientation toward God and the good that you wanted to eventually become. The modern content space has taken those practices, the early rising, the fasting, the cold exposure, the physical training, and stripped them of their formative purpose. They have been reconstructed as efficiency tools, which means that a man can practice all of them faithfully for years and emerge with a better body, a more profitable business, and a shallower interior than when he started. This is not a theoretical concern. I have encountered it in men who consume enormous amounts of content about discipline. They know the protocols, they have the systems, and they have, in many cases, a specific brittleness, a tendency to become destabilized when the output stops, when the metrics disappear, when there is no performance to review. Because the practice was never connected to the interior. It was always only connected to the result. The men who are most caught in this pattern are often the most sincere. They genuinely wanted to become better men. The problem is not effort. The problem is that the discipline was aimed at the wrong target. the outside of the man rather than the inside. The Desert Fathers, the Christian monks who retreated to the Egyptian desert in the 3rd and 4th centuries, were some of the most physically and mentally disciplined men who have ever lived. They lived with almost nothing. They fasted with a regularity most modern men would not attempt. They woke in the night to pray. They submitted to structures that make our morning routines look soft. But the purpose of all of it was singular and interior. The formation of the soul into the image of God. Every external practice was in service of that interior project. Remove the interior project, and the practices are just exercises. Valuable exercises, maybe, but not formation. What the current men's content space is missing, and what I believe the men it is trying to serve are actually hungry for, is a way to talk about what is happening inside a man, not just outside him. The discipline of sitting still, of being present to yourself, of placing yourself before God with no agenda and no performance and no output to show for it. That discipline is invisible to every productivity tracker. It appears on no morning routine list, and it is, in my experience, the one that determines who a man actually becomes. So what does interior discipline actually look like? It begins with the practice of being still. Not meditation in the commercial, technique-focused sense. The specific practice I mean is simpler and older. Sitting before God, in silence, with the explicit intention not to manage the experience, but to be present to it. Not to get information, not to formulate a plan. To be known by the one who made you, and to allow that to matter. Most men who attempt this for the first time discover two things. First, that they are worse at it than they expected. The mind is constantly moving toward problem solving, planning, evaluation, distraction. This is not failure, it is data. It tells you how the interior has been trained. The mind that cannot rest is a mind that has been conditioned for constant production. Recognizing that, honestly, is the first genuine moment of interior work a man can have. The second thing most men discover is that the discomfort of stillness is not random. It has a direction. It is pointing towards something they have been managing around. And the longer a man has been running, the more disciplined his external life, the more pointed the discomfort tends to be. Because the external discipline has made it possible to avoid the interior indefinitely. The man without a morning routine has no structure to hide behind. The man with a perfect 90-minute morning routine has something to do every time the quiet tries to speak. So what does interior discipline actually look like? It begins with the practice of being still. Not meditation in the commercial, technique-focused sense. The specific practice I mean is simpler and older. Sitting before God, in silence, with the explicit intention not to manage the experience, but to be present to it. Not to get information, not to formulate a plan, to be known by the one who made you, and to allow that to matter. Most men who attempt this for the first time discover two things. First, that they are worse at it than they expected. The mind is constantly moving toward problem solving, planning, evaluation, distraction. This is not failure, it is data. It tells you how the interior has been trained. The mind that cannot rest is a mind that has been conditioned for constant production. Recognizing that, honestly, is the first genuine moment of interior work a man can have. The second thing most men discover is that the discomfort of stillness is not random. It has a direction. It is pointing towards something they have been managing around. And the longer a man has been running, the more disciplined his external life, the more pointed the discomfort tends to be. Because the external discipline has made it possible to avoid the interior indefinitely. The man without a morning routine has no structure to hide behind. The man with a perfect 90-minute morning routine has something to do every time the quiet tries to speak. The practice deepens over time. Not necessarily toward ease. Sitting before God remains confrontational for most serious men, but toward clarity. The man who practices interior discipline begins to know things about himself that the external metrics cannot tell him. He knows when he is acting from fear versus conviction. He knows when his ambition is in service of something real or in service of his own anxiety. He knows what he actually believes because he has sat with himself and with God long enough to hear it beneath the noise. Then comes the longer work of allowing that interior formation to shape the external life. Not replacing the gym, not abandoning the financial system, not dismantling the morning routine, reordering it. The external disciplines become in service of the interior project rather than the other way around. The workout becomes the practice of stewardship, of caring well for a body you have been entrusted with, because stewardship matters to the God you are accountable to. The financial discipline becomes the practice of responsibility, of taking seriously the provision you carry without building your identity upon it. This reordering is slow and quiet in appearance. From the outside, a man undergoing interior formation may look very similar to a man simply following productivity protocols. The difference shows in the cracks, in how he handles situations where his performance cannot validate him, in how steady he is when external circumstances shift, in how present he is in conversation with his children, in the quality of his word in the moments where no one would know. The interior shows up in the small moments, and the man who has been building it for years has something beneath him that the man who has only built the external does not. In Mark 1, the gospel writer describes the first days of Jesus' public ministry. The pace is almost overwhelming. Healings, teachings, crowds gathering, the disciples barely keeping pace. And then, in verse 35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place, where he prayed. The disciples find him and deliver what sounds like a report. Everyone is looking for you. The momentum is real. The need is urgent. The opportunity is present. And Jesus' response is not to return and capitalize on the moment. He says, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." What is happening in that solitary place is not a technique. It is not a morning routine. He is placing himself before his Father. The same act of interior orientation that appears before every significant decision in the Gospels, in the midst of every heavy season. Before choosing the 12 apostles, he spent the night in prayer. Before Gethsemane, he withdrew. The busiest, most consequential human life ever lived was anchored in the interior discipline of being alone with God. This is not incidental to the text. It is the model. And if the Son of God, if the man who could calm the sea and raise the dead, still required the solitary place to remain oriented, that tells us something about what we are skipping when we optimize the morning and leave the interior untouched. Psalm 46 gives us the language for what happens in that solitary place. Be still and know that I am God. The Hebrew word translated be still, rapha, means to let go, to sink down, to cease striving. It is the posture of a man who has stopped performing and allowed himself to be held. The verse does not say, be productive and know that I am God, or be disciplined and know that I am God. The knowing comes from the stillness, the knowledge of who God is, and therefore the settled sense of who a man is before God is available in the quiet in a way it is not available in the noise. James 1 describes trials as the mechanism God uses to produce steadfastness in a man. And steadfastness, James says, must have its complete work, so that a man may be complete and whole, lacking nothing. Wholeness is the goal, not optimization, not peak performance. Wholeness. The integration of the interior and the exterior, the bringing together of what a man does with who a man is. That work is the work of interior discipline. It cannot be outsourced to a system. It cannot be tracked on a spreadsheet. It happens in the quiet, before God, over years. Here is what I want to leave with you. You have probably already built more than you think on the outside. The question worth sitting with, the one the stillness will eventually ask, is what is being built on the inside? Not as an accusation, as an invitation. The man who commits to interior discipline, who practices being still, who sits before God without performance, who allows the quiet to do what only the quiet can do, is building something that no external metric will ever capture and no external circumstance will ever take. He is building a self that does not require constant